to speak with you about the systematic collection of social ecological variables within the context of the long-term environmental monitoring networks of Europe. As you will see from this first slide, there are very many people involved in this work. So although I'm the one who's doing the talking, there has been an awful lot of people involved in what we are doing. The scope of what I will speak about today, I will first of all introduce myself and then a little bit about social ecology and the context of the eLTER project and the network, and then the process of selecting the social ecological standard variables and the current work in the eLTER community to achieve a set of standard social ecological variables. So in terms of myself, I didn't go straight to university. I went to the local college, and then I got my job and discovered that in science you need more paperwork. So I upgraded with a Bachelor of Arts and the Doctor of Philosophy, and since then I've been doing on-the-job training at the University of Life. So my employment started looking very much at a single disciplinary approach in terms of tree reproduction and looking at the tree as a whole system, and that progressed to thinking about the tree in the landscape and eventually to the long-term monitoring. So my journey to social ecology started in the natural sciences, but I'm learning many more techniques from the social sciences now. And I started single discipline and looked at, in terms of experimental and empirical research, looking at mechanistic models, transgressed into interdisciplinary with the conceptual models and integrated models. And I'm very much in favor of this digital twin approach, which is becoming the science fashion of today, where we link the process understanding of systems with the data that is collected. I'm also very keen on transdisciplinary science, when the science is focused on the problems of society. I think single discipline science is needed for an understanding, but the problem is if we do not understand the role of that science within the wider community, we get the environmental degradation which we see around us today. So I use some terms there, like transdisciplinary, etc. And I won't go on to explain them because there is a wonderful lecture by my colleague Jen Halser in this series where she tells you about the differences of individual science disciplines and the need for transdisciplinarity, which I very much agree with. One way of looking at the social ecological system is to think about human well-being depending on the natural environment. We need that for our food and shelter, but the natural environment also does harm to humans in terms of droughts and floods and pests and pestilence, etc. So our human impact on the natural environment also rebounds in terms of the natural harms and the natural benefits of nature. So with this slide, I'm trying to convince you that we need sustainable ecological systems, and we need them, in order to manage them, we need long-term data. So I'll give you one quote comes from the field of management by Peter Tucker. We can't manage what we don't measure. And if I can put that simply, it's like you cannot manage your finances. You do not know how much money is in your bank or in the tin under your bed. You don't know how many dollars or pounds or rupees you have to spend. So you need to measure in order to manage. And another quote which I find quite interesting is from Wagner Hilberg, who was a quantum physicist. What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. And when you're thinking about standard observations, I feel that we have to keep these ideas in place. We're not measuring the whole of the environment, we only measure an element of it. And if I can put that in perspective, if, for example, we're going to measure the population, and we break that down into ages for reproduction of women, for example, if we are interested to know whether the population of an area is likely to increase or decrease, then what cutoff we use as the reproductive age of a woman, of the population of women, is important. If we choose 12, for example, or 13, which in some cultures is common, we will get an answer. But if we use that answer in Scotland, it would be wrong, because commonly women or girls of 13, 14 do not reproduce. It's much more common to be in the late teens or early 20s. So I wish to use that as an example to say that we have to be very careful when selecting standard observations. To think about this in the context of the eLTER network, this is a network of sites across Europe where the sites are attempting to look at the atmosphere, the social and economic sphere, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the geosphere, all of these different areas, all of these different aspects of the environment. And these networks are national networks primarily funded by national funding. So they all have their own national perspective, but they also want to look out beyond their national perspective because so many of the problems are global. So the European network of sites is wanting to become an infrastructure, a European research infrastructure. And there is a link here to show you that we are trying to become part of the ESFRI family of networks. And on the right of the slide, you'll see that the protocols, they suggest a head office with topic centres. We have the platforms and the sites, and we'll have a service portal looking to collect and deliver high quality data. Now, the European Union has funded a project, the eLTER PPP, which is the preparatory phase project, to try and create this entity. We also have a project, the eLTER Plus, which is looking to determine some of the infrastructure needs. So here is the ambition from the project. Our ambition is to advance the best expertise and infrastructure available for addressing the crucial need for integrated research on European ecosystems at multiple scales and for optimizing and advancing the collective use of these services by key groups. Well, in order to do that, we would like to have standard observations. So the same data being collected in the same way across all the sites. And as a community, we have decided that this should fulfill 4 criteria. We should describe the key elements of the energy, water and matter budgets, as well as the abiotic, biotic and socio-ecological heterogeneity of the ecosystem. Have critical relevance for understanding the coupled human-nature system. Have high sensitivity to environmental change, and have critical relevance for environmental modelling. This takes us back to this idea of a digital twin, where we can try and get some of our understanding, our process understanding, linked to the data. So these are the 4 criteria that the community are working towards. And this is the process that they are following. So that there has been an internal consultation within the community. What variables are we collecting already that we think are important? And there was 173 of those identified, and they were prioritized, and 24 in fact were high priority for the socio-ecological. And we are at this point at the moment where we are now going to go to the community to consult what would be the best. In terms of that consultation, we have a document that has been a discussion document that's been delivered, and it states very, very clearly it is a discussion document. It is not the final answer. but you have to start somewhere. And there they are looking at relevance, cost efficiency, and feasibility. And we're taking that work further. These are the, sorry, first of all, I spoke about the social ecological variables, and these have been grouped into different categories, and there are different variables in them. And these are being tested at 6 different LTSER platforms. Now, we would love to test them at more than 6, but it's always a case of funding with these issues. I have here attempted to give you 6 pictures to show you that there are differences between the platforms. They're in different countries, they have come from a different historical understanding, and there are different data sets available in the 6 different countries. And the one picture does not do credit. These platforms are much wider than these 6 images deliver. But what's the best source of the 24 or 46 standard social ecological observations? Well, in many ways it may depend on the question that is being asked. Are we looking only at the site? Are we looking at the platform? If we're looking only across a national network, then perhaps national data is most appropriate. But if we want to look wider, perhaps we need harmonised data that's available across the whole of the platforms in Europe. So the aspects to consider when selecting data sources to deliver might be how easy is it to provide at all sites in a standard way? What precision is needed spatially and temporally? Is it effective for the eLTER RI to provide the data centrally? Cost effectively, feasibility, relevance. Taking the 46 social ecological variables that I mentioned earlier, the 6 platforms, which here are just represented by their country code, look to see what they could find locally. And we also look to see what the European official statistics could give us. And this is the proportion of the 46 variables. So what's most striking here, I think, is that no country or no LTSER platform manager thought that they could deliver data on all of the 46 variables. The Austrians and the French could deliver the most. You see that they have several categories up to 100%, but many of the other platforms could not. And some of the platforms were less than 50% for some of the variables. Now, would that be a useful delivery for the eLTER research infrastructure if they could find a source of that information, perhaps using the European official statistics? So this work is in progress, as I said, so I will only give you a few examples of the work. And primarily they are based on the Cairngorm National Park LTSER platform, simply because that's the one I work in and therefore I know the data better. But these images you have on the screen now are 2 different ways of looking at land cover. There's a national UK land cover data product, and there's the CARIN European standard. And you can see that they're at different precisions, and at first glance, these pictures actually look very different. They are both giving us land cover, but they are using a different number of categories, and they're assigning the land slightly differently. So if I use the UK land cover product and the Romanians, for example, use a different national product, could we compare the results? But if we used the CARIN, we definitely could. But then would the land managers in the UK be very interested in us using the CARIN, because they may want to compare the LTSER, which is the Cairngorm National Park, with the National Park of the Loch Lomond, and then they might want to use the national data. And I don't have an answer to that. I mean, that's what we are going to study next. But here I've taken the same image, just made it small and given you the actual proportions of the different types of land cover. And they're both valid. The UK have also produced the percentage of change over 25 years within the Cairngorm National Park. And this temporal spread of the data is important because very often the early data is not collected in exactly the same way as later data. And this has to be kept in mind. If we think about the National Office of Statistics, most countries have them, and there's a European Central EUROSTAT dataset as well. This again is an example from the Scottish site, and I've selected that because one of the other problems we have is that this data is not collected at the boundary of the park. But in Scotland, in fact, the National Statistics have created the data at the park level, and we can just download it. And here they have taken the approach, the darker blue areas are showing where a lot of the area is outside of the park. So the centroid was outside and they decided not to include the population which was in that area because it goes beyond that area. So this is an example of the type of issue. You can say you want the population density of an area, and I think that's a very sensible measure. But what exactly are you measuring is the problem, and is it standard across the sites that you wish to compare? So what we can do, as I said, is use the European data. Here it is at a much coarser level, either the NUTS 3 when there's 4 different regions that encroach on the park, or the NUTS 2 where there's only 3 different areas. And a colleague, Will Bolton, has created a data lab which will allow us to cookie cut or clip the data to the area of the park. And this is a mechanism for going forward, which I think we will need. I've done this for the Romanian site and the Austrian site. And here you see that there is different precision in these two maps. And this again is something that we have to be careful for. It doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be using this data. This may be the best estimate we have of population density, and if that is what we want to be comparing, then this is what we should use. But we should be aware of what we are doing. So what are we going to do next? Well, we are going to work through some examples of the different ways of finding the data as I have shown here. And then we need to consult with stakeholders. We need to understand who's going to be using the data and what form they would like it to be delivered to them. So we'll find out what's the most cost effective for the eLTER to deliver. So their mission is to test that in the next year in the 6 LTSER platforms. And there is other work also being done in terms of standard observations. But that is one of the major thrusts in the eLTER Plus project, to try and identify standard observations for the social ecological variables. Thank you for your attention.